So welcome, my name's Paula Claytonsmith. I'm Chief Executive of LCRIG. I'm delighted that today we are bringing you a hosted webinar with our sustainability partner, Tarmac. Today's presentation is, I don't know why I'm doing so many arms. So today's presentation is actually one of the ones that I've been most interested in seeing this year. We've got some brilliant conversations from our colleagues from a couple of local authorities. Also, I just want to remind people, please turn your, obviously not the speakers, but please turn off your microphones if they've accidentally come on. I also want to sort of say to you all that this is a very, very topical subject, but it also means as a topical subject that we can sometimes stray into areas that are probably not for this webinar, but also I'm going to steer us away from conversations that bring up politics or that might stray into that area. So just to introduce you to the brilliant people we've got on our call today, we will be seeing a presentation from Megan Thompson. Megan is the Technical Product Support Manager at Tarmac. Hi Megan, thanks for joining us. Then we will be hearing from Chris Wright. Chris is the Regional Contracting Director. Many of you may already know him, contractor in the north. We have Dwayne Lowe joining us from Bolton Council. Welcome, Dwayne. And Dwayne is Deputy Director of Place at Bolton. And Dwayne is going to provide some of that sort of more, I suppose, strategic perspective from a local authority. And I'm delighted that we're joined by MacDonald. Mark is Highway Service Manager at Milton Keynes Council. Now, just a reminder, again, this is a very sort of topical subject. We are going to keep to time to make sure that we get everyone's questions in. But first of all, we'll have a presentation from Megan. Do you want to start your presentation, Megan?
Can everyone see the slides there?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, morning. Thank you for the introduction there, Paula. So my name's Megan Thompson. I am Technical Product Support Manager for Tarmac, primarily covering the north of the business. But after today's session, my contact details will be there, and more than happy for you to forward the enquiries to me, and I can get you in touch with the right people within our business. So today's session, a little bit of an introduction of why we're all here, why we're all on this journey. So decarbonisation and climate change is a topic we speak about a lot within today's world, whether it be within our construction industry or within the wider world and environment. We're going to dive in today a little bit of how Tarmac can work with you guys as local authorities and external businesses to collaborate together and work on that journey together. It's not something we can do as Tarmac alone. So it is important that we have the engagement and the collaborative working between us all. So looking at today, we've got a handful of us on the call, obviously sharing our expertise. We don't have all the answers, so we need to link in with the local authority pioneers as well, looking at what's being done in different areas of the UK and also in the wider industry and worldwide. How can we use them solutions? And we're going to touch on a little bit around the scalable solutions. Now, these are solutions we have available today. We've already proven the technology, we've proven the methodology, and it's how we then scale them up to make them a day-to-day business as usual operation. So first of all, who are we as Tarmac? Now, some of you may know more about Tarmac than others, so just a little bit of an introduction. Our journey started in 1902 when we painted the modern road surface. We've been reinventing it ever since, so if we continued to do what we did back then, we wouldn't have the infrastructure we have today. And in the same way as 20 years' time, 40 years' time, 100 years' time, technologies will change and we need to move with them technologies. So a little bit of an overview of what we do as Tarmac. 7 million of tonnes of asphalt we produce every year, top to bottom of the UK, on the strategic network, on the local authority roads, into private builds, residential, non-residential. We have a product and a solution for all environments. We maintain around about 14,000 miles of road annually. So if you think about your own authority, what does that mean to you? And on top of that, we also surface 5,000 miles of road a year. Now, obviously, as the UK economy grows and the UK population grows, them numbers will rise. The infrastructure needs to grow to allow for the population, whether it be new build hospitals, schools, the data centres for the future power that we're going to need. All of these kind of builds and construction all need some sort of asphalt surfacing in them. So how can we support with that? So a little bit of our sustainability journey so far. If we look at asphalt, there's a number of technologies have come through over the years, a number of changes. I mean, I know that there's an LCRIG webinar up and coming around SMA and how long that's been in industry. So if we look back to the days before SMA, we never thought that technology would come through. But as times are changing, the technology's coming quicker. So looking at our journey so far on the sustainability side, we start with a 2012 baseline. Now, we were looking at different technologies prior to then, but we've chosen to use that as our kind of starting line and baseline. So looking at that in a hot mix material, you've got a carbon footprint anywhere from 50 kilograms and above. How do we then move forward? We started putting RAP into the mix. Now, as you all know, RAP is going to be a bigger thing in industry moving forward. Our network is a resource that we can use and use and use again. And how do we process it right? How do we ensure that the products we put in today will be there for future generations to use? The next stage was into warm mix bitumen. So we looked at how we do warm mix products, how we bring them into industry. And we actually launched the Warm is Norm campaign around about 3 or 4 years ago now. And that's starting to build a lot more momentum. We're looking at how warm mix technologies can be developed as well to make sure that the asphalt we're producing is as clean as possible. But where are we at today? So today we've got biobitumen starting to come through into industry, and we're going to touch on a little bit around how we've used biobitumens and how we've kind of gone with the technology and developed it through to now have a 45% reduced carbon product. Now, if we looked at this journey in 2012, what could we achieve? And we've obviously got to that 45. We're now thinking 2030. So in 13 years, we've achieved this. What can we do in another 5 years' time? So how do we all work together to get to that stage? And that's where you guys come into this. So in 2020, in the October, over 300 councils had published climate emergencies. What does that emergency mean to you as a local authority? What can you do differently? How can we change and think outside of the box to be able to work on a cleaner, more sustainable route for our whole world? So how do Tarmac and CRH come into it? We have industry leading targets. Tarmac as a business is owned by the CRH group, who are a worldwide materials producer. We have an absolute reduction target of 30% by 2030. So we've currently achieved 14% on this on our own scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And it's now looking at the solutions that we've proven to drive scalability for scope 3 emissions, which is your roads. And that's where we need you to be on this journey with us and develop the solutions through and be willing to step outside of our comfort zones, think differently, and work on a cleaner way of building the strategic network. So a couple of examples of how we've done this. So go back to 2023, we did some schemes up in Stockton and Hartlepool. A lot of hard work went into them, and I can't take any of the credit. Chris was the guy leading it all from our side, and he will touch on it as we get into our panel discussion. But we looked at how we could work differently, how we could collaborate with a local authority, and what was your targets, what did you want to achieve? And what we developed was what we kind of captured as the art of the possible, bringing together all of the solutions that were available to us then, and looking at how they fit into the targets that we wanted to achieve, but also what the local authority wanted to achieve. Like I say, this isn't a journey that we're on alone. It's something that we'll work with you on and be able to deliver a combined target. And what we got up there was an 83% carbon reduction across the 3 schemes in 1 week in October. There was no offsetting done on them schemes. It was complete reduction. The carbon was fully removed from the build. And we achieved that through a number of different things. We looked at our material production. We looked at how we got the aggregates into our units to make that material. But then right through to Chris and his team and how they did the paving operation. What pieces of kit could we get our hands on? What was available to us as an industry at that point to be able to deliver in a different way of thinking and achieve the 83% reduction there. That did lead into a scheme with National Highways as well on the A64, where we achieved a 73% carbon reduction. Now, one of the reasons we've put the National Highways scheme in here, although it's not a local authority job, is what we did with the National Highways scheme was we looked at what their targets were, so we aligned it to their maintenance, construction and road user emissions and how we could build the scheme to get the highest reduction within each of them segments that was possible at the time. And that's where we were opening the doors to local authorities. Come to us, tell us what your problem is, tell us what you want to achieve, and we can work on that journey with you to be able to build a scheme and engineer a solution to get the result that we need at the end of this. And that's where our CEVO branding comes into it. So some of you may have seen some posts on LinkedIn over the last kind of 4 to 5 weeks. So CEVO is a brand name that Tarmac started the journey on around about 3 years ago with our ready mix business. And it's our carbon evolution. It's looking at what's available to us now and how we build that CEVO brand through, right the way through to 2050, and looking at how we can engineer and progress within industry. So we've now brought that into our asphalt world. And it is split into a couple of different pots. It's split into the materials capability, but also the pave excellence capability. These aren't solutions, these aren't technologies that have come out overnight. It's work that we've been doing for a number of years. So projects like working with the Carbon Trust back in 2011, right the way through to resurfacing Silverstone Racecourse in 2019. The lessons we've learned over them years have got us to the position we're in today, where we're able to launch CEVO Asphalt, bring it into the market and open that door to you to be able to come to us and build a scheme using CEVO Asphalt. It's all of our responsibilities to build differently with less carbon and make cleaner, greener roads throughout the UK. So I would be amiss if I didn't give a little bit of a shout out here to Hartlepool and Stockton. When we look back at the journey we've been on with Tarmac and how we've got to where we are today, it really was the guys at Hartlepool and Stockton who kind of led the way within the local authorities. We delivered sessions out to a number of different councils with the offering, what we were able to do. Now we appreciate that budgets don't always allow for it. There's kind of different issues within different authorities that are a kind of priority, and that's understandable. We're all on a journey and a learning curve with it. But what we achieved up there was the lowest carbon works in the UK with no offsetting. Moving on from there, we've got Brendan Colarossi, who I believe is on the call today, who within Hartlepool has defaulted to bio-bitumen on the schemes. So looking at budgets and how that works, Brendan's been able to work collaboratively with us to ensure that as many of roads as possible that Brendan's doing within the environment have got a reduced carbon element to it. Continuing to challenge us as a supplier. What can we do next? What is the next option out there to get the right product in the right situation within his assets? So the main question from the presentation, and something that is going to be open to everyone after the call, is how low do you want to go? If you want a 10% reduction, we have a solution. If you want an 83% reduction, like we had at Stockton and Hartlepool, we have a solution. The next scheme is how do we get a local authority road to net zero? How do we come together as an industry, full supply chain, using the lessons we've learned to get to that net zero target that we all have, that's written into law, written into legislation. We don't have a choice but to develop on this journey. And 2030 seems as if it's 4 or 5 years away. It'll come around really, really fast. 2050 will come around just as fast. And how do we develop through that journey? So on the screen now, if you want to quickly jot them down, I'll give it a minute or so. There is my contact details. The slides will also be shared out after the session, and my details will be on there. Please come to us with your challenges. Come to us with your questions. And it may be that at this stage it is just a little bit of fact finding, a little bit of seeing what the options are. But we want them first deployments within each of the authorities, and we can help you on that journey. Like I say, we don't have all the answers now, but we have a good selection of answers, and actually working together and sharing this knowledge and sharing what we've got available will mean we can all get to that net zero goal. So I'll leave that on for a couple of seconds more, and then I will hand back to Paula to lead us straight into the panel discussion. Thank you very much for your time there.
Thank you, Megan. And I think the great thing about having this sort of this webinar is such, though it's an opportunity to talk about the fact that you guys do want to be challenged in that whole question point of how far do you want to go as a sort of local authority. Now, notwithstanding, and I mentioned it at the beginning, that politics is playing rather an interesting role. We are not going to cover that sort of today. But Chris, it would be great to hear from you. I know you've got 27 years of experience. You'll have seen lots of changes, and you've been involved quite heavily in also pioneering this work as well with Stockton and Hartlepool.
Yeah. Listen, you're right. I've seen a lot of changes, but also I'd kind of echo a comment that was made when we kind of started this journey back in 2023 that if we, as the leaders of the industry, don't make the change, facilitate the change, nothing will change. And we actually showed an article from those of you who are old enough to remember Tomorrow's World. Back in the 80s, we showed an article from Tomorrow's World about RAP going back into asphalt plants, and we kind of found ourselves in 2023 just making a comparison that kind of 40 years down the line, we're still kind of trying to push the boundaries on RAP. But listen, that was kind of the change that we've seen, and it is a substantial shift. I think that we all need to make as an industry. Megan's quite right that legislation has set out that by 2050, UK has to be net zero in terms of carbon generation, and that presents challenges to us all. It was that kind of challenge that we certainly recognised talking to our customers in the northeast in probably 3 or 4 years ago. That what was the solution here? What was the thing that was going to turn the dial? And to a large extent, as Megan said, we didn't know, and it started off through. Can I echo the comment? Brendan's on the call. We started off with a number of, let's call it just exploratory sessions in terms of what is available, what's the likely journey towards decarbonisation of an asphalt manufacturing and laying process, and it's got us to the point where we set a pretty ambitious target. And that ambition was to, consider every aspect of the whole production process. So not just laying the asphalt, it was extracting the rock, it was processing the rock, transporting the rock, then producing the asphalt itself, then to the actual site and what we could do on site with the laying process. So when Megan talks about 83%, and it was very much badged as the art of the possible, because what we had to do was, from right across Europe, we worked with global suppliers, so the John Deere Group in Wirtgen, with Shell, with JCB, with Volvo, and then some smaller supplier support in terms of mobile battery technology for EV kit that was on site. So trying to consider every aspect of our process to demonstrate, and that's why we use the term art of the possible, and just try and demonstrate what the future might look like. And some of those technologies, as Megan said, are wholesale, ready to go. So biogenic bitumens, that is, I'll say, scalable now. The technology around plant and equipment is still evolving. If you just make a comparison with, cars, they've come on leaps and bounds in terms of EV technology in the last 5 or 6 years, and construction equipment is no different to that. It's still progressing. But yeah, that was kind of the challenge, recognizing, and it was purely driven by a customer led challenge that they have, whether that's decarbonisation and how that applies to the highways maintenance sector.
And Dwayne, you've had a pretty sort of stratospheric rise over the last few years. You started off as a sort of a chartered engineer, and now you're in that position of a deputy director of place, where you're exposed to all sorts of sort of different things. It'd be great just to add to the conversation about not just some of the challenges, but also some of the things that, as Megan posed the question, how far do you want to go, really?
Yeah, thank you, Paula. I think Chris raised a really interesting point when he was talking there, and this has to be, certainly for local authorities, has to be led by the industry, really. Local authorities are then beneficiaries of it. But I was just, as Megan was going through her slides, we're one of the 300 councils that's called a climate emergency. We have ambition, and I'm just looking at our climate change strategy now that states that operations of Bolton Council are to be carbon neutral by 2030. That's the council ambition. But the reality is, as a kind of a service within highways, we absolutely have one of our priorities on the service plan is to understand the carbon that's generated and seek to reduce it. We've never put a percentage against that. We've no KPIs against reducing carbon. It's kind of just it's an ambition. But we've also raised it on the same service plan. It raises a risk that we're not going to be carbon neutral by 2030. Regionally, it's 2038, and nationally, as Chris said, it's 2050. So those are the challenges. And Jan's put an interesting comment in the questions in the chat that we are, and the reality is as a council, we are still very, very financially led. So we have benefited, like all councils. We've got additional funding this year. We have put additional funding into significant amount of resurfacing, significant amount of surface treatments, like all councils will have done on here. The fact that we are a Tarmac customer is good, and we've benefited from that and the warmest norm that Megan was talking about. So we will have absolutely generated a lot less carbon than we would have done traditionally. But that's kind of just like maybe a happy coincidence that that's happened, that we are a Tarmac customer. Tarmac are either our contractor, or our other contractors do tend to use Tarmac materials.
Mm-hmm. And Megan, I know you were sort of up for that sort of challenge, and I think this is that interesting sort of thing about showing that you guys are passionate about helping to, support councils in that place, really, and as Dwayne says, take up that challenge of sort of pushing ourselves as one of the largest in the industry in this space, really.
Yeah, it's something. So I came into industry 8 years ago, so I almost feel kind of privileged. I've walked into industry at a point that carbon was part of the conversation. It's something that's developed quite quickly over them 8 years, and it's been part of my journey within industry is actually how do we decarbonise and what is the right solution. But like I touched on earlier, Tarmac can't get there alone. We need local authorities, we need the tier 1 contractors, the national highways of the world to come on the journey with us. And it's for us, it's opening that up to stakeholders. What do you need from us? How do we develop it? And we're looking at a number of different channels. I mean, we're hosting a day-to-day around sustainability where we brought our Midlands customers in the conversation. It's a vital part of the journey. And now we're in the asphalt world of bio-bitumens, the paving kit that's becoming available. and them solutions. But as Chris touched on, it's the want and need. It's that chicken and egg scenario that we do have plant and kit available now, but them suppliers won't produce more of that plant and kit until the need's there for it. But for the need to be there for it, we need to develop on that journey. But that goes across all industry and haulage, looking at that extraction right the way through to that final solution. I know one of the things that we've obviously touched on in conversations over the last couple of years is also the durability of roads. It's how do we build a road that's going to last longer? And that's almost a kind of takeaway for us, that actually we're now building roads to last longer. So as a material supplier, that's less material we're supplying. So it's almost a counterproductive way of looking at it, but it is the right thing to do for the environment. It's the right thing to do to get us to them targets, so that we can all maintain roads, keep them in situ for longer, and obviously that'll help us on that journey through.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you picked up the durability sort of point, because there's often that sort of discussion about, there might be a focus on cost, but actually it's that long-term sort of life cost that, can be quite challenging, but does also now have to be part of that sort of conversation, really. And Mark,
if I maybe could, Paula, just to kind of emphasise that point, it is a valid point, and Megan kind of highlighted on one of the slides there, the National Highways scheme. That was one of the objectives that we look to address for them. But a term that I keep using in regular conversations that I have is this kind of innovation development requires, I'll use the term, bold thinking, and being prepared to be bold, because the National Highways scheme, if I go back, it's actually 37 years, not 27 years that you said in the introduction, 37 years, go back to kind of the early 90s, mid 90s, when we had full road closures on the strategic road network. That kind of full closure scenario has now kind of taken a real step back from scheme delivery. But we did a lot of work, 9 months of planning with National Highways to undertake the work on the A64 under a full closure. But that full closure allowed us to construct a completely jointless pavement. So 2.5 kilometres of 2-lane carriageway with only 2 joints, one at the start and one at the finish. And normal construction would have seen probably 10 nightly possessions, a centerline joint between lane 1 and 2, a nightly completion joint. And listen, I don't want to sound like I'm telling grandma how to suck eggs, but any joint is potential failure at somewhere down the line with water ingress. So that kind of bold decision, work and collaboratively come up with a plan to mitigate the potential disruption from a full road closure did facilitate just one example of what we did, jointless construction, which together with the material design that we put together on that scheme was entirely aimed at extending pavement life through pavement performance.
And I think, what I would say is, playing devil's advocate, local authorities will always sort of think about, they'll hear a National Highway sort of case study and think it's not relevant to them. So what's the relevance from a sort of a local authority perspective that they could sort of take away from that in a quite a challenging environment in terms of closing roads? Yeah, listen,
I get that. I get that, and I think the relevance is that there's not one size fits all. But what I will say is what we did with National Highways on the A64 at Bramham. So for those of you not familiar with the area, it's just north of Leeds, heading off towards York. Off the back of that, Leeds City Council, through, let's call it local publicity, became aware of what we did, and we replicated exactly the same scheme on an urban section of the A64 as it went into Leeds City Centre 2 months later. So it's not, let's call it, they say that one size fits all. You can do it on every job. Some of the, let's call it, the decarbonisation solutions have always and always will be bespoke, and they will need the detailed planning. It will need the collaboration, but it also needs a little bit of that injection of kind of the being prepared to be bold.
Yeah.
Both from our side, from our side and the client side, because, from a Tarmac perspective, to, the resource level that was required to deliver that 2.5 kilometres, 1,700 tonnes of surface course, 30 guys, 2 surfacing squads, all the pavement equipment that we had in one shift was it's big commitment from both sides. So that hence the reason it was a lot of planning went in from all parties to deliver that scheme.
Mm. And talking about being bold, Mark, from a sort of durability sort of perspective, I know you are, when we last spoke, you were really quite passionate about that sort of materials sort of perspective. So what sort of insights and sort of experience can you share from that sort of, the importance of that durability angle?
We don't have significant concerns over the durability of warm mixed materials, and we're perfectly happy to use them in the right locations. But we are finding not just, we need to look at whole life carbon as well as construction carbon, which is part of the mix that Tarmac and ourselves are doing. It's no good doing something now that reduces carbon by 30%, 70% if you've got to do that job twice. So we do look at that. We're also looking at the durability with climate change, that we're going to have wetter roads in the future, wetter roads, warmer summers, and we're looking at the materials and how they perform. And Tarmac are certainly, looking at accelerated aging tests and all of the testing to prove that those materials are durable, as they say, and long term. I do want to just make a little bit of a point that unfortunately not everybody has direct access to Tarmac. Some of us go through third-party suppliers and we don't always get the information necessarily. And I think, I'm in some of the authorities and in LCRIG, and I do get to hear of what's going on in the industry, and we can trial new materials. But as an industry, we're really conservative. We've got quite old, pavement engineers and resurfacing engineers who used to use hot rolled and chips at times back in the day.
That's right, Mark. Alienate the entire audience.
We do have a little bit of resistance to change, and that's why something like this webinar, is the starting point for those conversations. We're not having our suppliers bring all of these materials directly to us and go, have you thought about this? So, we're still not always necessarily getting the latest technology and the latest ideas from Tarmac and other people in the industry, because we're using people who don't produce their own material. And that story is not always coming across to us. So I think getting this out there, getting people interested and involved and going, well, what can we do? So I need to put bio-bitumens down on some of my roads, but we haven't done that yet. So I think we've got to get the message out there. And it is, it's not the solution for everything necessarily, but we've got to reduce the carbon. We've got to look at the whole life carbon, and we've got to build for durability, because we are definitely not going to have the same climate in 20 years that we've got today.
And Chris, actually, this is a great point to bring you on, and then Megan, perhaps, because I know, Megan, again, you've been quite passionate about this, and Chris, with your experience, it is, how do we sort of get that sort of, more people knowing?
I think it's an absolutely valid point. We are conscious of it, that there is, let's call it, 2 routes that our business takes to supply material. Kind of Megan touched on it, 7 million tonnes worth of asphalt, and roughly that is split 50-50 between the part of the business that I work for, so our own in-house expertise laying the material, and the other 50% goes through our external customer base. In terms of kind of awareness, the reason that it's great to be given the opportunity to get involved with you guys as a customer base is exactly this point, Mark, to highlight what we can offer. We do, in addition, and we have kind of usually annually, we host and invite a number of customers along, but obviously we cannot invite everybody, and we'll hold a kind of a session for a full day, what we call kind of a next gen customer event. And that is just to give an idea of I'll call it the direction of travel of our business and, where we see the next 1-2 years, but just as importantly, the next 5-10 years, and particularly on a subject like decarbonisation, where you have got legislation that says 2050, what we see is kind of that sort of journey to get the industry and, what we all do to a carbon zero position. And, that will, if I was to highlight in the latter years, we need our suppliers to work with us. Bitumen is a hydrocarbon product. We've got biogenic, let's call it, movement and improvement. But then plant suppliers is, electric, the power of the future of plants. My own personal opinion, it probably isn't. You've got to, my view is that hydrogen at some point has got to transition upwards and become the fuel of the future. But that requires huge investment to produce hydrogen, and on the scale that I'll use the term UK PLC would need in order to operate at a true carbon zero level. So Mark, your point's absolutely valid. What I can say is, let's call it on an individual level, as Tarmac to local authority would always be more than happy to come in and facilitate either a lunchtime CPD event, and have this kind of conversation on more of an individual basis with selected people from your team. What we need is the ask in return is the opportunity to do so, because it's always difficult if you're kind of cold calling. But Megan's kind of put her contact details up. It's Megan or equivalent in your region that would do exactly that. So that's kind of the purpose of Megan's role.
And Megan, I know you are desperate just to sort of, you've put your number sort of on there. And I know when you and I first met, you were quite clear this is as much educational for you and your passion as well.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Chris has obviously touched on there the CPD sessions, and Mark, you're right. The key is for as many people in industry to know that this is an option, and it is a really fast developing kind of curve with it. And what we've achieved over the last 3 to 4 years, it's pretty much my full-time job now. It is talking carbon, and everything else is done in the background, but it's hosting them days. So one of the things I've been trying to do in the north, and there may be people on the call today who've actually attended a session, is bringing you into our plants as well. Come in and see the plant, see the operation. So we'll come in, do a morning session on the education piece, go around, have a site visit. But much the same as well is getting our teams and our colleagues within the business, whether they work in the asphalt kind of stream or within the rest of the business, bringing them out onto sites as well to understand it, because the amount of interactions we each have day to day, it takes that one touch point. I think we've spoke quite openly about it, and Chris will back me up on this one. We could do this to 100 people. Might be one who takes it up. But if that one person takes it up, then they go and tell 10 people, who then tell 10 people. It's that kind of spread through the industry. So yeah, obviously my details were on there. Please reach out. And if you have supply chain that you're working with and contractors who are doing your work, pass my details on to them. And it's that kind of filtration through the industry and sessions like today that really are gonna move the dial. Obviously, we will be at the Strictly Highways event in a couple of weeks as well. I'm there for the 3 days. I'll be on the stand. Come over and speak to me there. Anyone who might be attending the Highways UK session, please open that door with us. We're more than willing to have that conversation.
And Dwayne, I'm going to put you on the spot. Megan in her presentation, and I keep coming back to this sort of point about how low do you want to go. It would be great to hear that sort of strategic context of how important that sort of question is. And I know you were nodding when Megan and Chris were talking about, actually they were set a target to sort of almost try and aim at. You were nodding quite vociferously to that. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Well, I'm not sure I can, Paula, because you said I can't get political. But I mean, this is the reality. Is this certainly for local authorities? This is driven by politics. So, but and we have declared like the climate emergency. I don't think any of the councils have blinked yet and been brave enough to change their target of 2030. But and I suppose it's like I said earlier. And so, is it our ambition as a council? We do have a climate change strategy. At the moment, we have an ambition to be carbon neutral, and like I said, that includes that all. It's there in black and white that all council operations will be carbon neutral. So obviously that includes all the work that we do, all of our buildings and everything will be carbon neutral by 2030. But there's no funding being directly assigned to that by this administration, or potentially who knows whether it will be by future administrations. But I'm trying to be. I know I've probably not answered your question, but I'm trying to not get too political as well. It's just the fact that, and I suppose the target. So, and I did say that when we have within our priorities, within our service planning, we absolutely understand. We need to understand the carbon generated. We need to aim to reduce it. We've never assigned a percentage. We don't put a KPI because things change annually as well. So, I mean, we're here obviously to talk about resurfacing, but we do a lot of treatments. So that generates a lot of carbon savings, those, other than traditional methods. So we capture that, but one year we might make a significant saving in carbon deposit because of the treatments and because of the products that we're using that year. The next year, because of our priorities coming back from our asset management strategy, the next year we might make less. We might generate more carbon for our operations. So there's those kind of peaks and troughs that are generated by and without talking about maintenance backlogs and things, but we've got a huge maintenance backlog. So we have to intervene within those kind of roads with the right products at the right time. So I don't think we'll never set a KPI of we wanted to save 20% on carbon annually up to 2030 until we're neutral. That we won't get to that point. And as I said, in the same service plan, we've got it raised as a priority, but we also have it raised as one of our risks that we're fully admitting, and we've raised it as a corporate risk that we won't be carbon neutral by 2030.
But the fact, Chris, that you guys can do that has got to be a good thing for customers, even if they're not in the same position as Dwayne. It
is, but listen, I absolutely recognise that challenge, Dwayne. Whether you're a local authority or whether you're a corporate entity like we are, finances are always, let's call it, the underpin everything that we do or equally can't do. In my mind, it's about appropriate application of technologies for the right job at the right time for the right reasons. So it's not, whilst we've highlighted two examples there of 83% and 73%, Megan's earlier slide showed, keep me right on the numbers here, Megan, it's about 45%, and that is just from the biogenic component in the bitumen, which is probably the most straightforward element of what we can do is everyday technology. Some of the more, I'll say, challenging aspects is the fuels that are used in the asphalt plant. Probably, out of 100% of the carbon that's generated through this whole process, around about 80% sits in asphalt manufacture, the combination of bitumen and the hydrocarbons to heat and dry aggregates. That second bit of the heating and drying aggregates, there is alternative fuels available that are non-fossil fuel based, but there's a substantial cost associated with those. So is the practicality of that right at this point in time? Perhaps not. As technology develops, and we're doing a lot of, I'll say, exploratory work with John Deere, Wirtgen, Benninghoven Group, who are the asphalt plan manufacturers. What does that kind of journey look like? And kind of that's back to our journey, if you like, to 2050. So some of these technologies in our journey to 2050 and UK PLC's journey to 2050 will sit later in that time period. I guess the challenge you've got, Dwayne, is that you've been set a 2030 target, which good luck with that.
And Mark, just some thoughts from you before we sort of open up and answer any questions that anybody has as part of the webinar.
Not really. I mean, I've just been around a couple of asphalt plants last week, and spoken to the guys from Benning, etc. And I think it's a brilliant time to be in this industry with all the change that's going to happen moving forward with, alternative fuels and the different methodologies we're using. I'm not sure, again, I don't want to get political, but I'm not sure that 2030 target is going to remain beyond 2029. But I think we've got
moving swiftly on, Mark.
we've got to do as much as we can. And Dwayne touched on it. It isn't all about asphalt that we lay. It's about the treatments that we do on our network. It's, for local authorities, it's about that whole life cycle planning. And the one thing to remember is that asphalt is 100% recyclable. Everything you give us today goes into a road in hopefully 30 years. We'll be able to recycle that back into a new road in 30 years. So, it's completely a circular economy. And we've got to remember that. And, we're seen as the big bad carbon emitters, but what we do is completely sustainable. We can reuse it all. So that's one of the key factors to take away is we're going to get better, but I think it's incremental change rather than wholesale change. There is a cost element. I think somebody's asked that question, but it's also a cost element if you keep using hot mixes because there's extra fuel costs for that. So getting that cost right as well and making warm mixes and biogenic mixes the norm is, I think, where we need to get to. But it's people like us in the room and going, give this a try and see what it's like and start using it, because we've all got those climate targets to hit.
And I think it's not just about giving it a try. Clearly Hartlepool and Stockton have sort of been, very successful in it. And, I'm reminded of the fact that, the title of this webinar is, balancing sustainability with efficient delivery and durability. So, again, Megan and Chris, coming from an organisation that is driven to want to sort of do this, and it's not just customer driven, it's sort of company driven as well, is really quite an important piece. Now, just to remind people on the webinar, we've got 12 minutes left. I hope you've all written down Megan's telephone number and you've taken sort of the note of Chris, if you don't already know Chris. Do we have any other sort of questions? And Chris, whilst people are thinking of questions, I'm going to put you on the spot a bit and ask you on the question about, let's see, what sort of, from an industry perspective, and I think I'm going to take this from the sort of, I suppose, commercial perspective, what are you doing or what is government doing to help stimulate innovation? And actually, has that been government driven or has that been sort of Tarmac driven?
I'm going to listen to your political instructions and I'll talk about what we are doing. So what are we doing? There's a number of strands that we are looking at as to what we can do. It's, I'll say, self-help to go down this direction. So particularly around plant and equipment. So if I talk about our wider business, the EV technology for transport is evolving. I'll say at a pace perhaps quicker than it has in recent years, but there's still challenges around that. So from an asphalt perspective, slightly more challenging getting EV trucks, but certainly from a ready mix perspective, we are investing in EV technology for ready mix trucks. And these pieces of equipment are there's quite a premium. If you just draw a comparison with an EV car, the EV car is always 25%, 30% more than the internal combustion engine equivalent. So that's one example. The electricity that we use in our production units, and particularly quarries and asphalt plants, we use quite a lot of electricity, but that all comes from 100% renewable sources. So we've gone, let's call it, we're turning that dial. From my business's point of view, from a pave perspective, just earlier this week, I was down in Newark at Vertkin's factory and just having a chat with the team down there and the direction of travel of their business and what's kind of the latest technology in the paver fleet will look like. And we do heavily invest. We probably renew our paver fleet as regularly as anybody does in the UK surfacing industry. So we have a regular update, and I'll say the most fuel efficient equipment in terms of what we do as a surfacing operation, recognizing that currently there isn't EV technology that produces a paver that would generally be able to undertake the type of works that we do with a local authority. EV technology exists for, I'll say, smaller pavers for footpath type works, but not for what you would consider a typical carriageway works with a local authority. So that's just kind of 3 examples of, you know, what we are doing that I would call that kind of self-help to move us towards our target of the 30% reduction that Megan highlighted in the start of the presentation by 2030.
And I think, I know we've, Jan, is it, seems to be asking lots of questions at the moment. And I am going to sort of slightly play devil's advocate and avoid some of the questions about cost or things like that, because I think one of the things that I have certainly noticed, we deal with local authority, we effectively deal with every local authority in England, and some local authorities, for them, actually, yes, there is a cost factor, but actually for them, there is also, you know, if it means they get longer durability or other things like that, then actually so I think it's a sort of, you know, we need to temper in when there's any conversation about costs, that because the way local authorities work, which, you know, we all know is driven very differently, it can be really hard, I think, to sort of put people on the spot. But Megan, I know you guys have been quite keen on that sort of durability perspective, haven't you? And helping councils with that sort of piece, really.
Yeah, we have. I think the key bit around cost really is have the discussion with us. If you don't know what the options are, you don't know what that durability is, what that whole life cost could be, we're running in the dark. And it may be that we have a conversation and actually on this budget cycle, it doesn't fit. But then it may be actually it does fit, and without coming to us and asking what's available. So where we've touched on the bio-bitumen mixes that we did up at Stockton and Hartlepool and the paving operation, that was using as much technology and as much innovation as we could. It was what was available to us at the time. It may be that we work with you on that budget and on the cost of a scheme to give you an element of it that will give you a carbon reduction still, but it may not hit that 45% or the 83%. It's that balance between the two there. Dwayne?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I'm really, listen, I'm not on the payroll of Tarmac, and I'm going to sound like an advertisement, but I am aware that, so, I mean, we do use the warm mix, but going back to the point on durability, the range of products. So I'm fully aware that on some of our roundabouts, is it your Ulti-Grip product? Is that the product that we use? Which gives us that durability and that, you know, that extra resistance for some of those things. So it's still about the right treatment, and you can still have the warm mix, which generates lower carbon for us. And like I said at the start, we're just like a happy beneficiary of this, because all we want at the end of the day is the right product that's going to be durable. We don't want to be going back there. I mean, talking on behalf of myself and Mark, who are hoping to retire probably in the next 10 years, we don't want to be going back to the road again in the for duration of our careers. So that's like the next generation's problem. So it's all about that right product, and there's within the product range of the warm mix. And I know we're here to talk about the next generation, but you can achieve both things.
Good. And Chris, there's a question. They're now flooding in, which is great. So from David Blackburn, or is David from Blackburn? David has asked a question in the chat about putting together a new HTSC for Dorset and interested in carbon measurement techniques, e.g. PAS 2080. Any recommendations? Now, I know this, you know, we don't want to turn this into sort of too long a sort of answering of questions, because people can contact you individually, but any quick response to that, Chris?
I leave the rocket science of carbon calculations to a specialist team that we have within our business. So listen, I can certainly, if that question David, sorry, apologies, I cannot answer. We do get, because of, I'll say, we're not one for doing, Excel spreadsheets and just, firing out a figure that isn't correct. What we do put out, we want to make sure is absolutely correct and credible. So as a consequence of that, it is done by a singular team that we have in our business, whether that be for asphalt, whether that be for ready mix, and it's kind of part of the CEVO brand that Megan touched on earlier. So David, listen, if you want to fire that question through to Megan, we can get a response back to you. But yes, we do have a team that can produce carbon figures for the products that we produce, if that was your question. And that's the basis upon which we worked with Brendan at Hartlepool to validate the figures of 83%, and similarly for the 73% with National Highways with their decarbonisation team.
And thank you, Alexander, for your comment in the chat. I can already see some people are sort of thumbs upping on that. Now, we've only got 4 minutes left of this webinar. We always try to keep them to time. From each of the panelists, I'm just going to ask you to sort of make one sort of final comment, and I'm going to do that in order of as people spoke. So Megan, is there anything you'd like to add from today's presentation that you'd like people to take away?
Yeah, first of all, thank you to everyone for taking the time out to come and join us on the presentation. It's a busy industry. We know that time is critical to everyone. So by just coming on the call, you've already started that journey with sustainability and the journey on carbon. Reach out to us, come in and open that door, start the conversation. We are here to support and help with it. But I think for me, more on a personal level, this is the planet we all have to live on. So a kind of stat that's out there within the UK is Earth Overshoot Day. It's the day of the year that we have used all of the resources for that year. We hit that in May this year. We are using 2 times the resources we have in the UK within this year, and that date is getting earlier and earlier. I know for myself, and obviously Dwayne touched on him and Mark and Chris, the retirement. We all have families that are living in this world and on this planet. We need to be part of that journey, whether it's personally or business.
Right. Over to you, Chris. Megan's taking a big chunk there, so you're on a challenge.
I'm just going to reiterate what I said earlier. My comment to be bold and think about tomorrow's world. For those of you who are kind of, Mark, you said older, I'm going to say in the prime of life. Those of you who are in the prime of life like me, think of tomorrow's world in 1981 and RAP and how long that's taken to get traction. It's down to us as leaders if we're, to try and hit the objectives that we've all got around decarbonisation.
Thank you, Chris. Dwayne, quick one for you.
Yeah, just to kind of agree with Megan. Obviously, this is clearly a really important piece. We have made a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050. The things that Chris talked about, the introduction of hydrogen, alternative fuels, though I should say fuels, not fuels, alternative fuels are clearly the things that are going to get us there. And a bit of extra funding would be great as well.
Mark?
Yeah, it's not always going to be the right solution for every job. There might be specifics where you can't decarbonise as much as you would like to. But if you decarbonise everything you can, then you are definitely doing your bit and looking to the future. I think I've got 11 years before I retire, but I don't want to leave all the problems to the people who follow me. I want those roads to be down for a very long time. I'm fixing roads that are 25, 30 years old and they're still in reasonable condition. So as long as we can keep making those kinds of materials that are durable and carbon, reduce the carbon in them, I think we're all doing our bit to help the next generations.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Jan, I know you've asked for the reaction again. That could be a whole nother webinar on itself, that sort of response to that. So we can't sort of cover that today. But thank you to our speakers. Thank you for everyone joining the webinar. Please do take up Megan and Chris's offer of reaching out to them, linking in with their CPD activities or whatever. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Mark. I hope you have a brilliant sort of rest of the day, and I hope to see you all again in the future on a next webinar, or if not, at Strictly Highways coming up. Thanks again. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.